Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing well. I have been getting so many messages from so many of you guys who are just starting out on your Turo journey, and you're starting to experience some of the things that can go wrong and will go wrong no matter what, inevitably, as you continue to host more trips on the platform. And sometimes they stress you guys out and they're worrisome, and you want to know the best way to go about these issues. And it's completely understandable. When I started on my Turo journey so many years ago, and I started slowly experiencing these different types of incidents, I would have the same reaction, where sometimes you almost feel like you're in a state of disbelief that somebody would treat your car in a certain type of way, and it makes you angry and stressful. So in this video, I'm going to go over the top 4 incidents that do occur during your Turo reservations, and they will happen no matter what over time, and the best way to go about dealing with them. So I'm going to order them in, I guess, let's say we'll do the least stressful, least severe to most stressful, and most severe and kind of hardest to deal with. So these are the top 4 things. All right, let's start with number 4, and that is mileage overage. Now, sometimes there are renters out there who are new to the platform, and they're typically used to renting from your traditional car rental companies, which almost always offer unlimited miles. With Turo as a host, you have the option to set whatever miles you want per day that you want to allot to the trip. Now, usually Turo has some minimums depending on the car, whether it's 100 or 200 miles. So sometimes renters may not be super familiar with that, or they just might not care. So let's say they rent a car for a day, and for one day, your car offers 200 miles for that trip. They come back, they return the car with 500 miles on it, which means they went over by 300 miles. Now, as a host, what do you do with that? What should you do with that? And what's the best practice, right? So I'm going to do a little screen share and show you guys exactly how to process a mileage overage request. Now, my rule of thumb is if a renter goes over miles, you have every right as a host to charge them for those miles, because when they book a trip with you, it's very clearly stated how many miles you get for the trip, and if you go over, what the per mileage cost is. So when a renter goes over miles, all you do is you go through your reservation and you punch in the additional mileage overage, or it is typically already calculated for you by Turo's system. If you conducted a proper check-in and check-out of the trip, it shows you the per mileage cost. It'll calculate what that comes out to, and then it will send a request to the guest for that reimbursement. Now, something interesting to note here is that Turo recently implemented sort of a new formula of how they calculate that per mileage fee. And it's very important to pay attention to that, because your day rate actually dictates what that is. So let's say your day rate is $100 per day, and your car allows for 200 miles per day, and the renter goes over mileage, right? So basically the math is day rate divided by per miles distance per day. So 100 divided by 200, and that gives you 50 cents. So the per mileage overage, anything over 200 miles, is going to cost the guest 50 cents per mile. And that is how they calculate what that overage will be. So you want to take this into consideration so that you price your cars out accordingly, so that whatever the per mileage is makes sense for you and you're getting out of it what you want. So make sure you run that calculation. Now, one also other important thing to note that sometimes I forget is, let's say the renter goes over 100 miles, each mile is 50 cents. You think as a host you're going to get $50, but you actually don't get $50. You get the percentage revenue split that you're on with Turo based on your host protection. So if you're on a 70-30 split where Turo takes 30%, well, then they also take 30% of that total per mileage overage cost. So you want to make sure that you kind of just keep that in the back of your mind, so that you're not anticipating on getting X amount when it's really going to be, 30% less in my case, because that's the protection plan I'm on. So just some important notes on mileage overage. Doesn't happen very often, but when it does, you should be compensated for it as a host, and you should definitely follow through on that process. That's what it's there for through the trip reservation. Okay, number 3, and this one is quite important, is late returns. So a million things can happen during a guest trip, right? They can forget what time they had scheduled to return the car. They could be up to some shady business, who knows, and just have no plans of returning a car. Really, anything across the spectrum can happen. Now, as a host, you have certain responsibilities in this situation. So I'm going to kind of guide you through that now, because this will happen to where people don't return your vehicle when they're supposed to. So as soon as it's getting close to that reservation time ending, you always want to send your guest a message, and Turo's system will also automatically send them as one as well, letting them know, hey, your trip is going to end. You know, just make sure you return the car in the condition in which you received it and that you follow the drop-off instructions. So I typically touch base with my guests and just let them know, hey, you know, let me know when you're close by so that I can be there to grab the key. Now, let's say your guest goes radio silence, you don't hear from them, you don't know what's going on. Maybe you have trackers on your car and you see that your car is maybe 3 hours away, so you know that they're not going to make it in time. Well, a very important thing to do is to report a late return. Turo has a 30-minute grace period from the time that a reservation ends for a guest. So meaning if they bring it, if the reservation was going to end at 1 and they get it to you by 1:30, they're in the clear, no extra charge, and you as a host, you're totally covered, nothing to worry about. Everyone runs late, no big deal. But if it's going to go something beyond that, then you as a host, you have to report that as a late return, primarily because you want to make sure that your host protection, so essentially your insurance coverage, is intact for anything that could possibly happen to the car after the reservation window. So you want to make sure that you are fully covered should they get into an accident at, let's say, 2 p.m. and the trip was set to end at 1 p.m. So that makes you fully protected and you have no worries about what happens to your car. Now, it's very simple to report the late return. You just go through the reservation. Every reservation now has a help tab. You go through that help tab and you select the option for late return. And now Turo has actually automated the whole process to file the late return. And as you can see, they even have a script that they provide of what you should be messaging your guest. So the guest now knows that the car is late and that they need to bring it back to you as quickly as they can. The beauty of the late return process is also if the guest ends up keeping the car for an additional day for whatever reason, you know, they got lost or they had their travel plans changed, you as a host should be compensated for that additional usage. And in order for you to get properly compensated for that additional usage, you have to follow the system and file for the late return. If you don't do that, then you can't claim for those additional fees for the extra time that the guest had that car. So that's why it's super important. If your car is going to be out, you should get paid for it. So make sure that you follow that process and file that late return. It just takes a couple of minutes to do. Very quick, easy, and simple, and fully systemized. Okay. Number 2, I would say 1 and 2 are sort of a toss-up, and it kind of just depends on you as a person what is kind of more stressful. So for number 2, I ranked damages, right? And this is more so minor damages, not necessarily cars getting into an accident, because little things will happen. Little curb rashes, dings, nicks, maybe your rims come back curb rash, things like that. This is very common. Little things like this happen all the time, and you should not worry because that is what your host protection plan is for. But there are some really important things to note when stuff like this happens. So let's take a look at my BMW, okay? I'm gonna use this as a prime example. Now you guys will notice that the bumper has a little bit of curb rash where the paint is chipped off and you can clearly sort of see the black plastic coming through. Now, let's say a renter took this car out on a trip and they got into a decent sized accident. Maybe they ran into a pole or rear-ended somebody. And so the entire bumper is damaged. It is completely pushed in and it's likely going to have to be replaced. And maybe if we're lucky, it'll get repaired. And let's say you go to one of my favorite shops, if you're in the Southern California area for BMWs, is Caliber Collision. So I go to Caliber Collision. Caliber Collision says, hey, after looking at the damages, it's going to be $2,000 to get this repair done. So I get that all submitted to Turo. Turo looks at your photos and they see, okay, we're going to look at the before photos, your check-in trip photos, and then we're going to look at the checkout photos to see what the damage was. This is important because when Turo looks at my pre-trip photos of this car, they will notice that there was some pre-existing damage on the bumper, right? And this is going to work against you as a host, because as a host, it is your responsibility to make sure that you present that car in the best possible shape. Now, sometimes things are so minor like this that maybe you don't get a chance to get to it right away, to get the paint touched up and to kind of get that bumper looking in proper condition like I have here now. So what Turo is going to do is they are going to run the estimate on the damages that the guest caused, but they will subtract any pre-existing damage cost. So they'll take a look at that bumper, and they'll say, okay, host, prior to this car going out on a trip, it had, $500 worth of damage already done to it. Now, as Turo, they are not responsible to pay you out for that pre-existing damage, so that will actually get deducted from the total cost of repairs. Oftentimes, hosts are really thrown off track when they get their estimates and they realize that Turo is only going to pay them $1,500, but their shop is saying, hey, no, this is going to cost you $2,000 to repair. And they can't quite understand why that is. And so I really want to emphasize to you guys that if there is any pre-existing damage prior to the start of a trip and that same area gets damaged again, doesn't matter how severe it is or if that was going to have to be replaced, that pre-existing damage cost is going to get deducted from your total. So you have to really be aware of that. And that's why it's so important to always maintain your cars very well so that you don't end up in a situation to where you're having to come out of pocket when it comes time when you're forced to get a repair done. So oftentimes I get a lot of messages from you guys where this really worries you and you can't quite understand it and you think that, maybe Turo is trying to do you wrong. And believe me, I've learned this lesson the hard way as well. I have made these mistakes and I've learned. So, I'm sharing this with you guys so that you guys can learn from me and not have to go through this. So this BMW that I'm showing you guys, I've totally been procrastinating in getting this touched up. So as I'm making this video, I'm reminding myself that, hey, I need to go get this taken care of because should this car get into an accident, I am going to get dinged for that. So I need to go to Caliber Collision or wherever and go get this taken care of. Super, super, super important. All right, and for the final one, the number one thing that I think that you guys will experience, in the early stages of your Turo journey is people smoking weed in your car. This is such a common occurrence and it's really, really annoying when people do this because it's such a potent smell and it's very difficult to get out. Surprisingly, I don't get very many people smoking cigarettes in the car, but smoking weed, and maybe it has something to do with being in California, I don't know, has just become so incredibly common. So there's a lot of things that you can do to tackle this, and this is one that I think that you should be prepared for from the get-go. Make sure you have the proper tools so that when this does happen, you can definitely take care of it as quickly as possible because you don't want to let that smell sit in your car because the longer it sits, the harder it is to get out. Okay, so there's a lot of things that you can do here. Number one is you can claim for when somebody smokes in your car. Turo has a process. You can go through the reservation and you can either claim for just the odor. So if there's smell and there's no actual photographic evidence of any ash or anything like that, they didn't leave anything behind, then you can claim $50 for the smoke smell. And if there is any ash or anything like that, like you can see in my Mercedes-Benz, then you can claim up to $150 and Turo will pay that out to you. So as a host, you are compensated, and I'm so glad that Turo has this built into their system because it really saves you a lot of hassle and trouble, and it makes up for the time that you as a host have to put in to get this stuff out of your car. Now let's talk about products. What's the best way to go about dealing with this? Now the best thing that I've ever used is an Ozone Machine. There's a brand called Enerzen, and you can purchase that Ozone Machine off of Amazon. They're not very expensive. I'll put the link in the description below. I think they're about $80 to $100 or so. It's really great. You put the little machine in the car, you turn it on, let it run a cycle, could be anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, and it will typically get that smell out. For those of my friends who are in California, because of our emissions, you actually cannot get ozone machines here. So you have to sort of find a workaround to be able to get some sort of an ozone machine, but you cannot get them shipped. You can't purchase them anywhere because of emissions. So a secondary option to an ozone machine is actually an air purifier. So Turo actually sent me this one recently to test out, and I haven't had a car come back with smoke in it just yet, but as soon as I do, I am going to try it out. I think that this is very similar to a molecule air purifier, which are very popular. This one is Lavoie. You can also find this on Amazon, and it has a HEPA air filter, and apparently it works well for smoke smell. So I am definitely going to try this out, but I will put the link to this below, and it's pretty small and easy to use. You just plug it in, stick it in the car, run a cycle, and that should work well also. Now, if you're, for whatever reason, don't have the ability to, plug a device in and put it in your car and run that whole process, there are other things that you can use that I've used in the past. Two things that have also worked well for me that are easy and compact and something you can do on the go is by the brand Turtle Wax and Meguiar's, they sell something called a Ozone Bomb or Odor Bomb is how you can sort of Google them. I'll put those links as well. And basically they're these little miniature cans that you place in the cup holder of your car. You pull the lid off and you hit the little button, and it will essentially release this chemical into your car, which will sort of purify the air and get that odor out. These don't work as well as an ozone machine or an air purifier, but it is a great option if you're looking for a quick and easy solution, and especially if the smell isn't as potent as somebody who really hotbox. Maybe it was just coming off of their clothing, which happens as well. So these are probably the top 4 most common incidents that take place, and this is how you want to deal with each one. And you should really just be prepared for these things to happen because they inevitably happen, and just know that it's really nothing to stress out about. As long as you're prepared and you have all the tools that you need, you can definitely get through it and get the stuff taken care of. And most importantly, as a host, get compensated for your time to have to deal with these things. So rule of thumb when it comes to reimbursements and invoicing your guest is if they really did smoke in your car, if they really did go over miles, whatever it might be, charge them, right? If that's really what happened, you want to make sure that you charge them. You don't want to charge them frivolously for things that really aren't that serious. Like, let's say they went over by 1 mile from the distance that was included in the trip. That's not something I would really charge for. But if they're going over, an excess amount, then, it does affect the value of my car and my earnings. So I want to make sure I charge. So hopefully you guys have found this helpful, and I hope that this really brings you to ease when you kind of come across some of these situations, because they are going to happen. So just prepare yourself, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. All the resources that I mentioned are in the description down below. Thank you again for watching, you guys. My name is Saimah. This is Saimah's Experience. And if you like this channel, be sure to subscribe. Take care, guys.